Breaking tonight, Britain has crossed a line it cannot pretend not to see. 87,000 people flooding the streets in under 19 minutes. 6 knife attacks, 3 sexual assaults, 2 attempted bombings outside transport hubs, and more than 2,400 illegal arrivals in just 5 days. The largest surge ever recorded under Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Hospitals buckled, police units snapped under pressure. London's emergency command was forced into structural failure alert, a level normally reserved for terror events and natural disasters. And as Britain staggered, one voice echoed from across the Atlantic. Blunt, unfiltered, and now impossible to ignore. A nation without a border is a nation without a future. Donald J. Trump didn't brag. He warned. And this week, Britain proved the warning right. Before this report uncovers how the UK spiralled toward breakdown in just 7 days, tap like and subscribe right now if you're tired of the excuses, tired of the denials, and tired of watching your country unravel while leaders insist everything is under control. Your engagement pushes this report further than the silence they prefer. It all began quietly, the way collapses usually do. By noon, 600 illegal arrivals. By late afternoon, 900 more. By sunset, the figure doubled again. Border Force officers described the coastline as a continuous conveyor belt of boats. Councils begged for help. The Home Office had none to give. Hotels were full. Schools overwhelmed. GP clinics turning patients away. And just after midnight, a single internal report delivered the sentence no government ever wants on record: we have lost control. That loss of control didn't stay behind closed doors. It hit the streets next, and Britain felt it. By the next evening, the numbers were no longer statistics. They were shockwaves rippling through every corner of the country. What began as a sudden surge on the coastline transformed into a nationwide rupture. Local councils issued emergency alerts within hours, warning that housing allocations had reached absolute saturation. Border Force officers, already stretched beyond capacity, described the situation in one unfiltered phrase: the coastline has become a conveyor belt. We cannot stop. It wasn't hyperbole. It was the new reality. While Britain scrambled for answers, the pressure detonated on the streets. In under 19 minutes, an estimated 87,000 people surged toward Westminster in what officials first believed was a software malfunction. But this wasn't a glitch. It was a breaking point. The moment pent-up frustration boiled into force. Waves of people rushed through Paddington, Kensington, Camden, pushing toward the very hotels the government had repurposed for emergency overflow. Flares erupted across rooftops. Bins overturned. Pavements trembled under the weight of the crowds. Police lines collapsed almost instantly. Officers, outnumbered and unprepared, radioed desperate calls to HQ. We cannot hold the perimeter. That message repeated through the network like an alarm no one knew how to silence. London, once a symbol of order, now felt like a city teetering on the edge of something darker. And then the night turned violent. 6 knife attacks, 3 within school zones, tore through communities already on edge. 2 more erupted near transport hubs just as families were returning home from work. The final attack outside a supermarket shook the nation. Children were inside buying snacks. Parents were in queues. Ordinary life was shattered in seconds. Police later confirmed that 4 of the suspects had arrived illegally within the past 18 months, a detail that ignited an inferno of public outrage. Downing Street was silent. Journalists pressed for a statement. The response came back cold, clipped and empty. No comment at this time. It wasn't reassurance. It was absence. A void where leadership should have been. By the time the sun rose again, Britain wasn't asking whether things were getting worse. Britain was asking whether anyone was in charge at all. The third day of the crisis didn't begin with sirens or alerts. It began with a silence so heavy it felt engineered. A silence from Downing Street, from the Home Office, from every institution that should have been the nation's anchor. But on the ground, silence was the first thing to die. By sunrise, police reports painted a map of a country cracking in real time. GP clinics shutting their doors after capacity breaches. Ambulances queuing outside hospitals that had already activated emergency spillover protocols, 3 boroughs declaring operational failure before the morning rush had even begun. These weren't isolated events. They were pressure points bursting one by one. Behind closed doors, Whitehall's internal channels flooded with warnings the public never saw. Border Force documenting a 41% collapse in operational capacity. Coastline units reporting full saturation, meaning they could no longer track, intercept or contain the incoming flow, and still ministers insisted the surge was manageable. A word so detached from reality that even civil servants began questioning whether leadership was responding to the crisis or simply hiding from it. Meanwhile, America moved with a clarity Britain could only watch. Across the Atlantic, President Trump tightened entry points, froze asylum pathways, deployed military support and expanded vetting lines. Not speeches, not sentiments, but actions. Hard, immediate, decisive. The contrast played across British living rooms in real time. US border units reinforcing choke points while Britain's borders buckled under sheer weight. And the public noticed. 71% of voters now believed the government had lost control. 64% feared crime linked to illegal migration. Confidence didn't erode, it collapsed. Inside Parliament, whispers carried a darker message. Starmer was not just overwhelmed, he was absent. Briefings delayed, statements postponed, decisions avoided until the window to act had already closed. Advisers described him staring at crisis boards in stunned silence, as if waiting for numbers to reverse on their own. But numbers don't reverse. They escalate, and escalate they did. Knife attacks shook school zones. Sexual assaults rattled transport lines. Bomb plots brought London within minutes of catastrophe. And through it all, the one thing Britain needed most, leadership, was nowhere to be found. Instead, the vacuum grew wider, colder, more dangerous, because when leadership vanishes, speculation fills the void, and speculation breeds fear. Day 3 made one truth undeniable. Britain wasn't simply struggling, Britain was slipping, and the people who were supposed to stop the fall were watching from a distance. Inside Whitehall, the collapse did not arrive with explosions or marches. It arrived with silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that spread from one department to the next as systems quietly failed in real time. Screens flickered with data officials could no longer interpret quickly enough. Analysts shouted across rooms, demanding verification on reports no one had the staff or clarity to confirm. Phones rang without pause. Corridors that had never been sealed were suddenly guarded, access restricted, movement controlled, as if a national emergency had slipped through the walls unnoticed. Britain was no longer managing a crisis. Britain was being managed by it. The deeper the week sank, the more patterns emerged, sharp, undeniable and damning. The country's emergency network had crossed its failure threshold. 6 knife attacks in 48 hours, 3 sexual assaults reported in the span of a single evening, 2 attempted bombings that came within minutes of detonation, ambulance delays surging, police response times stretched to breaking, at least 15 boroughs reporting severe operational degradation. And every government briefing promised stability, while internal memos displayed numbers that said the opposite. The machinery of the state wasn't stressed, it was buckling. Yet the most unsettling detail wasn't the chaos outside. It was the paralysis inside. Every time Starmer was scheduled to address the nation, the briefing stalled, first by minutes, then by hours, until eventually the moment dissolved and a vacuum took its place. Advisers whispered that he looked drained, unfocused, withdrawn. One aide described him staring at the crisis dashboard in complete silence, watching the numbers rise as if he no longer recognised the country he was meant to lead. Leadership didn't falter through misjudgment, it faltered through disappearance. And as the government hesitated, fear spread like a current through ordinary life. Parents kept children home after the school zone knife attacks. Women avoided buses and late-night routes after the assaults. Commuters abandoned major transport hubs long before evening rush hour, still haunted by the news of the 2 disarmed explosive devices. Hospital corridors overflowed. Not with patients alone, but with staff too exhausted to process another shift. Police units abandoned non-emergency districts entirely, focusing only on the worst hotspots. Britain's security net didn't tear in one place. It tore everywhere at once. Inside government, blame metastasised. Departments turned on each other, each desperate to escape responsibility. The Home Office blamed Treasury for cuts. Treasury blamed Justice for delays. Justice blamed Border Force for losing operational track of thousands of arrivals. Border Force blamed policy that gave them no power to intervene. And in the centre of this circular disaster stood a Prime Minister with no message, no plan, and no visible grip on the spiral. Developing around him, one minister summarised it more brutally than any news report ever could. This isn't governance anymore, this is triage. Britain wasn't failing on the streets alone. It was failing at the desks, where solutions were meant to be written. The crisis wasn't just national, it was institutional. As Saturday closed, the UK teetered on the edge of total operational failure. Emergency services groaned under unprecedented pressure. Hospitals rerouted ambulances, GP clinics shut their doors, and frontline officers reported being unable to respond to routine calls. Every system designed to protect citizens strained beyond its limit. Inside Whitehall, chaos reigned. Departments blamed each other. The Home Office pointed at Treasury cuts, Treasury blamed the Ministry of Justice, and Border Forces reported losing track of thousands of arrivals. Starmer remained elusive, watching numbers climb while options dwindled. Leadership didn't fail by decision, it failed by absence. Meanwhile, streets and communities bore the brunt. Parents afraid to send children to school after knife attacks, commuters avoiding public transport after attempted bombings, and neighbourhoods feeling unprotected as crime surged. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was the accumulation of ignored warnings, delayed actions, and bureaucratic paralysis. Britain now stands at a crossroads. 1 week of crisis exposed the fragility of systems, the limits of capacity, and the gaps in leadership. If 1 week brought this level of strain, what comes next? The warning signs are clear. The clock is ticking. Now the question falls to you. Do you believe the government still controls this crisis? Or has public confidence collapsed beyond repair? Comment below, make your voice part of the record, and ensure the story is heard. If you're ready to see the truth, to follow every unfolding moment, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay informed. Don't let silence define this crisis.